Okay, folks, let's get seated. Let's open in a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for the opportunity to gather together today, and pray that you will bless our time together, and that we'll be able to cover some of these difficult topics today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we had a meeting the other night, and Pastor Steve said since we weren't going to sing on Sunday, he was going to be done at 10:15. I had that documented. It's in my mind. I remember. And that didn't really work, did it? Yeah, well, that's what I'm out there saying is, who does he think he is, John Haller or something? I mean, come on. So it's good to see all of you. I must acknowledge the presence of my wife today, my editor. When I speak sometimes, we were married 45 years ago today. It was a very hot day in Mansfield, Ohio, and I was sweat, not because of getting married, I was sweating. I just sweat. As you know, if you ever watch me up here, it doesn't take much. And after the ceremony, then we had a receiving line. We had like 350 people there. And we're on our feet for quite a while. And so we finally get down to the reception area of the church. And, so Pam, I'm standing there, and Pam hands me a glass of punch. So I drink it, and then I sort of turn around, and she's standing there with a glass of punch. She goes, "Where's your glass of punch?" I was like, "Right there, I drank it." She goes, "We're supposed to drink it together." I'm like, "Okay, I didn't know. I'd never been married before, so." And frankly, I'd watched other weddings, and I hadn't really noticed that much, and more concerned about getting a corner piece of cake, with all the extra icing or a flower on it. So 45 years ago today, we started on this, and 40 years ago yesterday, I was admitted to the practice of law. So that means that for the first 5 years we were married, I was a student, and Pam used to introduce me as, "This is my husband, John, who I am looking forward to him graduating and supporting me in a manner to which I have not yet become accustomed." But she said, "But I am willing to adjust to it." So I guess she did. So, well, today, I'm going to try to keep it short, just because I'm going to go to lunch with my wife. And since she didn't cut the grass yesterday, I have to cut the grass sometime. The CoronaRiots, planned-emonium. It was, there was a lot of things that happened this week. I covered some of them. I did a 2-hour interview with Doug Hagman on the Hagman Report on Thursday. You can find that on his YouTube channel, podcast, Hagman Report, whatever. He's on a number of different platforms. And it's interesting, we didn't really talk about Minneapolis at all and what was going on in Minneapolis at the time. Things change pretty quickly. So let me address a few issues about some things that are going on to kind of set the context, and then we will talk about the CoronaRiots and what appears to be planned-emonium. We talk about the convergence of events each week and the things that are happening in our world. This week, again, if I try to keep these things to a reasonable amount of time. I'm not going to lock myself into a specific minutes, but I leave a couple 3 hours worth of stuff that I never get to cover, and it just kind of continues to build up and fill up my hard drive. And there's really a lot going on at the same time, as you've probably noticed if you're paying attention. And again, these covers from Foreign Policy magazine really age pretty well. A world disrupted, can we fix this? So I'm going to talk about that. And I want to address one thing first. This is a church thing. This supposedly took place on Friday night, a night of promise. I guess it was on a bunch of the different Christian networks. I just have to say, this is I think there's some people on this list that should know better than to join up with some of these other people. And look, I admit I'm not perfect. Sometimes I'll go on just because I go on a radio program or something like that doesn't mean that I agree with everything that the host has ever done or anything like that. And sometimes I speak at a church where there are some differences on some things, but some of these are really people you really need to be concerned about and what they've done to Christianity. So I would just encourage people to be very careful with things, with events like this. Bethel Music is on there and some other people. That's just, there are lines to draw, and sometimes there's a bunch of lines on here to draw, in my opinion, with the list of people here. So, again, I always, when I say these things, I'm sort of looking at myself because I'm trying to make sure that I don't fall into the same trap. So let's look at some things. Now, it's very interesting. Now, listen, I read the New York Times. I don't believe everything the New York Times says, but I like to read it because I like to know what the enemy is doing. And by and large, you can pretty much get a flavor for what's going on. But when we talk about Bible prophecy and things and what's going to happen, it's very interesting that you will see things in secular press that line up perfectly with Scripture. So here is last Sunday's review section, their editorial section, opinion section. Well, what they call their opinion section, the whole paper's opinion for the most part, but this is what this really is our opinion section. And look at what the title of it is. No one knows what's going to happen. Why we should stop asking pundits for their opinion on doing things, particularly on the coronavirus. And it's clear that people got a lot of things wrong on this particular issue. And even the New York Times is noting is that, when you really get right down to it, nobody knows what's going to happen. Which is probably why they will endorse a particular candidate for president who doesn't really know what is happening for the most part. Am I allowed to say that? I'm not endorsing anyone, but I talked about this on the Hagman show the other day a little bit. It's like, is this really the best they can do? I mean, they had like 80 people running in that party and they ended up with this. It doesn't speak well for American politics. Now, this morning in the Sunday Review section, kind of an unusual front page to that section. It's blank at the top. And at the bottom, it says, "The world is broken." And it's an article by Tom Friedman, who is a man of the left and sometimes makes some good points. But, he goes on, prattles on about why the world is broken and how we can't fix it and nobody knows what's going to happen. And it's interesting that people want to know what's going to happen. And Scripture gives us a pretty good roadmap of what is going to happen prophetically. And it certainly seems that we're entering that time. And I hear people, secular people on news shows and that type of thing saying, the world's a mess. I don't understand what's going on. I don't think it will ever be normal again. We're not going back. It's the new normal, or as I titled my thing a few weeks ago, the new abnormal. But people really would like to know what's going to happen. Well, back in January, at the 50th anniversary of the Davos meeting, World Economic Forum, it's very interesting. So these are the elites of the world, and they get together and they put out this report called Global Risk Report 2020. And in the report, they go through a bunch of risks, and they have some interesting charts. And one of the things that's very interesting is that they show all the stuff that's interconnected, extreme weather, human-made environmental disasters, infectious diseases, food crises. Now, the things in the red squares are things that result from other events, like you see over on the right, they have biodiversity loss, and then a line over to food crises. Biodiversity loss causes a few food crises or food crises. Above that, human-made environmental disasters, that leads to a food crises. And global governance failure is connected to infectious diseases. So but I think it's very interesting because they show how everything, their view is that everything is interconnected. Now, this was published back in January for the Davos meeting. And one of the interesting things, though, that happened was that they came here, long-term risk outlook, top 10 risks by likelihood and impact over the next 10 years. So if you look down that left column, they have 10 things: extreme weather, climate action failure, natural disaster, biodiversity loss, human-made environmental disasters, data fraud or theft, cyber attacks, water crises, global governance failure, and an asset bubble. Now, with regard to that last one, I thought that I agreed with that was a looming crisis. And my personal opinion is, while the lockdowns did not help the economic thing, when China shut down in late January or mid-January for 75 days or more, the bubble, the debt-fueled world economic bubble burst. And a lot of the carnage that you see was going to happen regardless. Again, the lockdowns didn't help, but places that didn't lock down are still going through the same types of unemployment and that type of thing because the world was fueled by debt. And it looked great on paper, but how does it look today? And so they were right. But the interesting thing is when you go through that whole list of 10, there's nothing in there about a virus, is there? But they had sponsored in October, the World Economic Forum, and the Gates Foundation had sponsored that Event 201 war game about a coming pandemic. And in that case, they chose a coronavirus. And while there are some similarities, there's some big differences. That pandemic that they used in Event 201 started in South America, and I think it jumped from swine to humans, and it ended up killing over 18 months, 65 million people, which is quite a bit more than what it looks like this current coronavirus thing is going to do. But the point is that they didn't really, in some respects, at least they didn't put it in their top 10 in this report. They talked a lot about climate change, and it's very interesting to watch as people talk about, oh, this coronavirus is so awful, the coronavirus is just terrible. And then what do you end up with is, but then they will suddenly start talking about climate change, and I'm not sure I see the connection between the two. And there's some kind of misfiring going on in the synapses up in their brains to connect the two necessarily. But it just shows that they have agenda. But it's also interesting that even though the World Economic Forum, when they published this back in January, probably prepared it and finished it up in December, they didn't put a coronavirus or pandemic on there. But when the pandemic happened, they started very shortly thereafter, they roll out this website. I talked about it, I think I did a midweek thing on April 1st. They rolled out this website that has all of this interconnected things they have a section, very well-developed section for COVID-19 and a bunch of other sections, and it's being continually populated with information. So if you really want to know what the globalists and others plan to do, go to weforum.org/strategic intelligence. You might have to sign up for an account. You can probably get the COVID stuff for free, but you'll see how it's all interconnected, and they have videos, articles, that type of thing. But the thing is, they missed it. And here there is this one section they have, very interesting that they chose these conjunction of railroad tracks. Turbulence, the new normal is the way they titled it. And I think it would be here, I would refer you to passages of scripture like Jesus talking in Matthew chapter 24 about the birth pangs and things that are becoming. He talks about pestilence and nation rising against nation, ethnos against ethnos, wars and rumors of wars. And it seems like when you look around the world, you see that everywhere. I don't even have some slides on some of this. For example, India and China are getting into it right now in the border in the Himalayas. They've been moving military in there. They've actually had some little fights going on between their soldiers and that type of thing, and they could end up in a war. And I don't know that many people hear about that, but it's going on, and it's another one of these crises. There's a lot of crises that are going on. Here's just some things that are happening because of lockdown. Need an exit strategy. Couples falling out of love in lockdown. Now I will exclude the howlers from this, in that we're actually spending more time together and loving it. But a lot of people they're not doing well. And what they're noted in here was lawyers and other people who deal with divorces and stuff. This is from the Times of London yesterday. The lawyers and that type of thing, they're getting texts like really early in the morning, in the middle of the night, and that type of thing. And the reason they're saying is because the spouses are together a lot, and so they have to contact the lawyer about getting divorced when the other spouse is asleep. So if like in our marriage, Pam is an evening person, I'm a morning person, so we always say we've been married 45 years, but only awake together for about 8.5. And maybe that's why it's working. And I'm sure that's true with a lot of other couples. But that's what they're doing here. So, the morning people are contacting lawyers in the morning, the evening people are contacting lawyers in the evening when the other spouse is asleep. And and they're just saying that things really shut down on divorces and that type of thing when the coronavirus lockdowns started. But now that things are opening up, they're expecting a big explosion of divorces from this. Kind of interesting. Now, one of the things that has been a big issue is about the restrictions that have been put in place in many countries and states in the United States about churches meeting. And it's a big issue. And so the issue here in the United States is we have the right to the free exercise of religion, and how can they shut us down? There were a group of churches, I'm sure most of them are going to go ahead and meet today. I think there were a couple, 3,000 churches in California that said, listen, we don't want to follow the governor's restrictions. He's essentially limited the gatherings to 25% of the capacity of the church, or 100 people, whichever is lower. So if you have a church that seats 4,000 people, supposedly you're allowed to have 100 in the auditorium. So some of the pastors are taking this to task. There was a church, South Bay United Pentecostal Church, in, I think it was in Costa Mesa or Irvine, filed a lawsuit, asked for an injunction, took it to the district court, then appealed it to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit denied it, so they appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court. And Friday, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision on the application for injunction. It was written by Chief Justice Roberts, and the decision was 5-4. Chief Justice Roberts did concur in the denial. He wrote a separate opinion. The justices that voted against it were, as you might expect, Justices Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh. So I'll just read a little bit from the decision, at least from Chief Justice Roberts. So technically, the churches are not supposed to be meeting unless they comply with Gavin Newsom's restrictions. Although California's guidelines place restrictions on places of worship, those restrictions appear consistent with the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. Similar or more severe restrictions apply to comparable secular gatherings, including lectures, concerts, movie showings, spectator sports, and theatrical performances where large groups of people gather in close proximity for extended periods of time. And this is part of the issue. And I think there's fairly good evidence that part of the issue with this virus is viral load. And did I? Oh, okay. So I never had that happen before. But the concept of viral load, if you're around a lot of people or you're with people for a longer period of time and they're sick, you're going to get exposed to more of the virus. The more of the virus you get exposed to, the more ill you get. So that's why, passing people in the aisle at Walmart or Sam's Club or something is not the same as sitting next to them at a football game where people are yelling and screaming. That's sort of the concept. So he says, listen, so this is what Roberts bases his decision on. The precise question of when restrictions on particular social activity should be lifted during the pandemic is a dynamic and fact-intensive matter subject to reasonable disagreement. And what you have to show when you try to get an injunction is you have to show a likelihood of success on the merits. You just don't go in there and say, Judge, I really need this injunction because it would help me. You have to show that you have a very strong likelihood that you're actually going to win the case. And so what Roberts is saying here is there's a lot of competing factors, and I don't think they've established this. Our Constitution principally, he says, entrusts the safety and health of the people to the politically accountable officials of the states to guard and protect. When those officials undertake to act in areas fraught with medical and scientific uncertainties, their latitude must be especially broad. So that's what he said. He said essentially that the First Amendment is subject to these other restrictions of public health. So that's a constitutional issue. That's the way he's interpreting the Constitution. I think it's indicative of the fact that I really don't know how conservative he is. I think that he's demonstrated a number of times in the past that he's more of a guy who's trying to compromise and get along than taking a strong constitutional position. So this is not really a surprise that he would vote this way. It does show that, elections are important, that if you want more conservative, constitutionally oriented justices on the Supreme Court and elsewhere in the federal judiciary, who is selecting those judges is very important because they do have lifetime appointments and they don't leave. And this is, I've been in front of federal judges that are 90 years old, and they're very competent, I might add. But, sometimes they probably stay a little bit too long. And in some cases, you wonder if they should have been there in the first place. It was clearly a political thing that got them there. Here's what Justice Kavanaugh said in his dissent. The church and its congregants, referring to South Bay Pentecostal Church, simply want to be treated equally to comparable secular businesses. The state cannot assume the worst when people go to worship, but assume the best when people go to work or go about the rest of their daily lives in permitted social settings. In sum, California's 25% occupancy cap on religious worship services indisputably discriminates against religion, and such discrimination violates the First Amendment. Where those broad limits are not exceeded, they should not be subject to second-guessing by an unelected federal judiciary which lacks the background competence and expertise to assess public health and is not accountable to the people. It's clear that the Justice Kavanaugh came down on the side of the Constitution and a very strict reading of the Constitution as to what should happen. It's interesting that while there are still these restrictions in place now in California and elsewhere across the country, this is This happened today in Jerusalem, and you can see the video online if you want. 2 of Islam's holiest sites reopened to worshipers. This is a picture, obviously, of the worshipers of Islam bowing. They're facing the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, by the way, interesting point of historical fact, what you always say is that, or what you hear is that, well, in Islam, we pray facing towards Mecca, right? Because that's where the Kaaba is. And the Prophet's Mosque in Medina has opened, but the Grand Mosque, the Great Mosque in Mecca, has not reopened yet to public Islamic worship. It's still closed. But here in Israel on the Temple Mount, the Muslims were bowing and praying this morning at the mosque, which is supposedly oriented towards Mecca. However, if you take the orientation of that mosque and draw a line straight through it, it doesn't point towards Mecca. In fact, almost all of the early mosques built around the time of Al-Aqsa Mosque and other mosques point towards Petra in Jordan and not Mecca. Now that raises a lot of questions about the origins of Islam and that sort of thing. And as Jay Smith, who has done some great videos on this, but the problem with Muhammad, the problem with the Quran, and some other videos. So here is an issue. And here is something else. Gay pride events canceled. World leaders will headline a 24-hour live stream to celebrate virtually. What are they celebrating? Well, all the big gay pride rallies that usually take place around the end of June, including a huge one here in Columbus, are canceled right now. And it's still a very strange world. I'm also going to note to you, too, I don't have a slide on this. I don't know if you're familiar with David Wood. He lives up in Michigan. He has a ministry that focuses on evangelizing and witnessing to Muslims. He put up a video on YouTube this week, and in that video, what he did was he cited the Brother Andrew organization. Is it Voice of the Martyrs? They come out with a report each year on persecution. He discussed that report in his video extensively. Christians are being persecuted in Pakistan and Iran and Nigeria and other places, usually by adherents of one particular religion, but they're also being persecuted in China extensively, people put in jail, same thing in North Korea. And so he talked about that in his video. YouTube gave him a strike for talking about things that violate their community standards. It was the second one that he got. So he actually has a video up on someone else's channel talking about what YouTube did to him, because he's not allowed for a couple weeks to upload anything to his YouTube channel. And he was talking about a factually documented report about persecution of Christians, and somehow this violates YouTube standards. I think we know where this is heading. So some of us, my updates, I think in the near future, there's a Remnant Truth Network, non-YouTube, non-Google channel that's being put up. And so my updates and some other teachings will be there in the near future. Remnant Truth Network. I think it's rtntv.org is the website. You can go there and subscribe, and there'll be different teachings of different people and that sort of thing. But this is where it's going. This is clearly a time where we're going to be persecuted. We also have the economic problems that come along with I think the China shutdown, the oil price war, and the lockdowns. And now in the United States, over the last 6 or 7 weeks, 40 million people, almost 41 million people, have filed unemployment claims. It's shocking. These numbers are not, they're not anything that anyone's seen. In fact, Foreign Policy has an interesting article saying, why are stocks soaring in the middle of a pandemic? And it's true that the stock market is up. Look at the opening paragraph of this. The contrast seems grotesque. A deadly pandemic has shut down the global economy and left millions of workers furloughed, fired, or stranded without gigs. The future for most businesses looks uncertain to dismal. Yet U.S. stock indices are near all-time highs at giddy valuations comparable to the 2000 dot-com bubble in 1929. Foreign Policy researched but could not find a moment in financial history that remotely resembles today. Think about what they've said there. They could not find a moment in financial history that remotely resembles today. So we ask a panel of leading experts to help us make sense of the markets and what their state tells us about the economy and society going forward. And so I'll just share what some of these experts have come up with. One of them says, investors see the world through pre-pandemic lenses. Nothing in financial history compares to what's going on. As one, David Rosenberg, the president and chief economist of Rosenberg Research, said, this is the mother of all liquidity-induced equity market rallies. Nothing in financial history compares. This is not about vaccine hopes, not about the economy reopening, and certainly not about the deep economic contraction coming to an end. It is all about massive amounts of liquidity provided by the U.S. Federal Reserve. Looking at the timing and numbers, and it becomes obvious. Since the end of March, the Fed's balance sheet was expanded by $3 trillion, twice the expansion that took place in the depths of the 2008 to 2009 Great Recession. It just so happens that over the same period, the S&P market capitalization has jumped. The Fed's balance sheet has gone up by $3 trillion. The S&P market capitalization values have gone up by guess what? How much? Not quite 3 million, 2.8, not quite 3 trillion, but 2.8 trillion, hand in head with the Fed's balance sheet. In fact, statistically speaking, the correlation between the equity market and the Fed balance sheet has now crossed above 90%, even higher than the already close relationship between equity prices and the Fed's quantitative easing programs between 2009 and 2013. So in other words, the Fed is funding the markets, and the people in the markets are taking advantage of all that money. But that money comes from, they're just effectively printing it out of thin air, and they're putting it into the market, and people are taking advantage of it. Another note, someone noted that one of the reasons why the market is up is Wall Street is flourishing while Main Street is suffering. The more the markets rely on the Fed, the less the economy will be able to sustain high growth and robust job creation. Another one says, ignore the stock markets. The pandemic makes those forces even stronger. Workers are scared, if not unemployed. Network companies are becoming more critical to daily life, and large internet-based retailers and service providers are stepping in while small local companies close. Today's market exuberance may seem grotesque, but the rising share prices of listed companies reflect the grim underlying reality. Another one says, equities are no indication. The biggest risk to equity markets is that Fed Chair Jerome Powell may take the punch bowl away and go home. Another one notes that we're not even remotely in this together. A world with guaranteed income for capital and unprecedented unemployment for labor tells us about the relative power of each. Very interesting article. And at the same time, another proposal, this is kind of interesting when you look at how, Bible prophecy talks about 10 kingdoms in the end times. So number 10, Downing Street Britain has come up with a proposal seeking to forge an alliance of 10 democracies to create alternative suppliers of 5G equipment and other technologies to avoid relying on China, because China is controlling this market with Huawei. People are concerned about the back doors that are being built into all this stuff by the Chinese that's being used for tracking and that sort of thing. So they've come up with the G7, and they're adding Australia, South Korea, and India to it. That's their proposal. And this will be done to kind of fight, to get the technology going and get away from China. So the bottom line is the world markets are in turmoil. It may look like the stock market is up, but in my view, it's as bad as it was in 2008, 2009, 2013. It's a debt-fueled bubble. The Fed is buying up everything. They're papering over bad debt of trillions of dollars of corporate debt. They've converted magically into, Class A debt or whatever they want, bonds and whatever they want to call it. And it's fake. And I don't know what the answer is. I do not think that the economy is, it's very difficult to analyze. You see things that are happening. Somebody wrote to me one and says, well, I think the economy is good because I work in used cars and used car prices are up. And I said, well, that doesn't prove that the economy is good, because what it does is it proves that there's reasons for people to buy used cars. Go look at the subway in New York. Ridership down, 95%? The metro in D.C., the tube and the underground in London, ridership's down 85, 90, 95%, public transportation. Well, people still got to move around, so what are they going to do? Go buy a used car. That creates a demand for used car, supply and demand. There's demand and the price goes up. It's the same way with houses. There's article after article after article talking about the fact that, particularly in the suburbs, and I see some realtors in the audience shaking their head, the suburbs, housing prices are going up fairly rapidly. There's a lack of supply, and it's not matching up. But a lot of people don't want to live in densely populated condo developments downtown. They want to move to the suburbs. So there's a lot of people wanting to buy homes in the suburbs. Am I right? And so it's driving up prices for houses in the suburbs. And it doesn't make any sense, because you look around, all the restaurants are closed, people are unemployed, 40 million unemployed, and your house price goes up. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around it. But the fact that your house price goes up doesn't mean that the economy's not in the dumper, and that there are going to be a lot of problems as this thing shakes out. Here's the thing about emerging market petrostates are about to melt down, because the oil price is down, and so countries like Venezuela, Ecuador, Mexico, other countries that are heavily dependent on the price of oil are going to have major problems. It's even tough for Saudi Arabia. It's even tough for Dubai. Dubai, remember the great development of Dubai? They built those islands out there, the Palm series and the World. The World, in fact, I saw a video about this just the other day. The World islands that they built off Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, it's a bunch of islands, and when you look at it from a distance, it looks like a map of the world. They're unoccupied because nobody's buying them, because the world's changed. And you see these crazy things. Now we have this stuff about contact tracing. If you have an iPhone, you have a new update in your queue, and it will install a coronavirus thing that will link to an app that you'll get from the Ohio Department of Health or the California Department of Health or whatever to do this contract tracing. And there are a lot of concerns, very valid. I share these concerns about the tracking that goes on. But listen, they're already tracking us. I mean, I stopped by one of the golf shops the other day and I looked at Callaway golf balls. I go out, I get in my car, I drive down the road, I go to a stop sign, I look at my Facebook feed, and there are Callaway golf ball ads in my Facebook feed. And the phone was in my pocket the whole time. I mean, this happens all the time. And I'm looking for that magic putter. I keep getting sent putter ads, or you buy something and you continue to get ads for the stuff you just bought. So it might be artificial intelligence. It's not artificial wisdom, because they keep bugging you about stuff you already bought. So that's neither here nor there. Now, this is an interesting article. I got this from Patrick Woods, who's spoken here at Technocracy News. Airlines pushing contract tracing immunity passport as right to travel. Airline travel is just devastated. Down 90%, airlines laying off people by the thousands, jets being parked everywhere. They don't even have enough spot at some of the storage areas in the desert to park them now. The lenders that finance the purchase or lease of the jets, they're also looking at how do we it's not even worth it for, why go repossess it? I mean, who are we going to sell it to? Nobody. And so it's causing, like, for example, when we were in England last year, we stayed up near Derby. And at Derby, there's this huge Rolls-Royce facility or facilities. It's a huge employer in the area, but Rolls-Royce makes jet engines for like the 787 and the Airbus wide-body jet. And they're not making those, they're selling them. So as a result of that, Rolls-Royce is laying off thousands of people in England and the UK. And so this, everywhere you look, it's just this ripple effect about everything. But here is a report from the IATA, International Air Transit Association, Biosecurity for Air Transport, a roadmap for restarting aviation. And you're going to see things like this. I mean, everybody's going to be coming out with reports as they try to emerge from this thing. And here it is, the passenger experience, temporary biosecurity measures pre-flight. Now, I like to travel. I've flown lots and lots and lots in my legal career. We like to travel. But I'm looking at this and I'm like, I think we can drive the Prius and, you know, because, I mean, they're talking about sometimes like 4-hour check-ins. You got to be there 4 hours ahead of time before a flight. So what that does is and I was traveling a lot after 9/11, I just widened the circle of where it was worth my time to drive and listen to some good Bible teaching in the car while I drove or make phone calls. So now my circle is getting close to Atlanta, which is like 8 hours away, 8.5, I don't know. Depends how you drive and how many times you stop, but we're like, Pam and I were like, Charlotte, that's one stop. You get the food while I do the other stuff, and then we switch while I pump the gas. And, you know, it's like sort of a NASCAR pit stop on the way. And like we came back, I think one night from Hilton Head, one stop in West Virginia. And it was like, you know, don't dilly-dally, get the cheeseburgers and let's go. And nothing to see in West Virginia at that place at 10 o'clock at night anyway. But let's look at this, the passenger experience. We foresee the need to collect more detailed passenger contact information, which can be used for tracing purposes. So whether the government imposes it or not, the companies you're doing business with are going to do this. And unless you have the contact tracing app loaded on your phone or your device, they're not going to let you fly. It says here at the last paragraph, IATA strongly recommends that states set up government internet portals in order to collect the required passenger data. Using internet-based technology would allow the use of a wide range of devices for the data capture: computers, laptops, tablets, mobile phones, etc., which I think would include Alexa and what all those other voice-operated things that people have around their house. And it's going to change air travel. A lot of people are going to decide it's not worth it. Well, they don't think it's worth it, then nobody's going to Venice or Milan to buy, you know, overpriced luxury goods on vacation. People are going to Vegas, you know, where you can go to fake Venice and fake Paris and buy overpriced luxury goods while you're on vacation, plus dumping money down the rat hole of a gambling table of some kind. Well, this is an interesting thing, too, is what's going on with the fight with China. Trade war, are they responsible? What's going to happen there? And the other thing that China has done is China has just come out and put in a essentially draconian measures in Hong Kong that are contrary to the agreements that China made back in 1997. They're imposing all sorts of really onerous burdens on the people in Hong Kong. And to the extent that the United States has said, we can no longer view Hong Kong and China as separate. We have to look at them as the same. And this is going to have an impact if there are sanctions that get put in on China. They're going to be put on Hong Kong. It's going to impact the Hong Kong economy. And you see how this stuff, it's like these spiraling, interconnected things. It's like a world full of slinkies going down the stairs, and they are all getting tangled up on the way down. Geopolitically, one of the hot areas right now is Libya. There's a guy named Haftar. He's essentially a warlord. And Haftar is getting support of Russia. Russia has these mercenaries called the Wagner Group. The U.S. killed a couple hundred of them in a battle in Syria a few years ago. Now they moved over to Libya to try to get Haftar into power. Turkey supports the UN-backed government, mainly because it's more Muslim Brotherhood oriented. And this is, it's a big problem. Turkey has recently sent 10,000 people, 10,000 fighters from Syria to Libya to fight in the battle there. And so Haftar was doing pretty good. Now he's losing. And then this morning, and this is kind of an interesting update, and Turkey's had a lot of problems with the coronavirus. They've been on lockdown. Moscow's been on lockdown, maybe much more draconian than things we've had around here. Same things have happened in Turkey. It's affecting the economy. It's affecting politics. Putin's been having some problems of his own in Russia because people are just, they don't like nobody around here likes the lockdowns, but people in Russia like them even less, and they're blaming Putin for this. But here's an article on this morning's Arab News. Provocative Erdogan to drill for oil off Libya. And this, I've talked about this a couple months ago. What Turkey did was they entered into this economic maritime zone between Turkey and the UN-backed government in Libya, even though they're in Western Libya, not in Eastern Libya where this maritime zone goes. So what Erdogan wants to do is he wants to shut down the gas pipeline, the East Med gas pipeline that will be built from Israel, Cyprus, up to Greece to supply gas to Europe. And so Erdogan, even though he's having tremendous political problems, he's not very popular, he's moving forward with these because the operative thing in the world today seems to be never let a crisis go to waste for anything. Here's an article, interesting article in the National. This is a newspaper, one of the newspapers in the United Arab Emirates. Global food security is at risk as plagues of coronavirus and locusts collide. And so the guy rightly notes that we have this problem with these locusts. Oh, it looks like the locusts are coming across my slide. Look at them swarming. I had to point out just because I spent a lot of time on that slide. Here's what he says in the article. Part of what makes the combination of the two plagues so daunting is that they both grow exponentially. Locusts increased their numbers 20-fold in the first 3 months of an outbreak, 400-fold in the next 3, and 800-fold in the next. It's no wonder that we refer to locusts and virus alike as plagues. And it's a problem. And there are other things that are happening. I'm not even to the riots yet. That's the next slide. And this is a new National Geographic magazine. You'll miss them when they're gone. If you have problems with bugs, don't look at this article. It's got every bug in the world, very nicely done graphic. But it says that there are places where they've been studying the bug loss, insect loss. And in some places, Germany and some other places that they've tested, the insect population is down 76%. and they're very important to the food supply and other things, and eating other bugs. And this, again, this is one of these things like the statements that you heard about the economy. We've never seen anything like this before. And then you come over to this, and all these articles say, we've never seen anything like this before. So there are all these systems that are, for lack of a better term, collapsing at the same time. Except your house in the suburbs is going up in value. That's
and used cars.
And used cars, yeah. Yeah, if you're a used car guy, your value of your car is going up. And new car dealers are having trouble though, because people don't want to buy new cars. And I'm just telling you, I look around and I sort of lose the ability to form words at some point to describe the carnage that I see, and particularly in law, where I work in financial services and banks and that type of thing. It's an incredible thing to watch. And then, of course, if something goes wrong in a case, where do you go now? Because I just got another order that, some of the federal courts, they're effectively closed until July 1st. They'll have telephone hearings. And people that do depositions are struggling with, do we sit in a room with somebody for 8.5 hours asking them questions? And it's much more effective to be there in person than it is to do over the telephone. I've done both. And I don't like the telephone or video deposition. But, court reporters are like, I'm not sure I'm going to let my employees go to a conference room to take the transcript. So it's just like this swirling thing. And then planned-emonium. What the officers did in Minneapolis, by all estimates, was wrong. But people are not protesting. They're destroying. Windows in the office building that I work at in downtown were broken out Thursday night. Friday, they sent everybody home early, and I'm getting these alerts. Have you getting these alerts on your phone now, like Columbus on curfew, avoid downtown Columbus, and that type of thing? And you see this everywhere you look: Philadelphia, Kansas City, Atlanta, Dallas. I saw a video of a guy in Dallas defending in a store. It looked like they killed him. He came out to defend his store, and the mob attacked him. And you can watch the video. The one I saw had 9 million views on it on Twitter. And it looked like the guy was dead. But I think he survived, is the last report I had, but he's in very serious condition. And he was just defending his store. I saw a video of an activist. She's saying, listen, we're coming for everybody. And so you have this provocation. I gave you the quote from George Soros last week, right? And he said, this is a revolutionary moment, and we're going to take advantage of it. And so what you see is these images of these things like places burning. I think this is a police station in Minneapolis that they set on fire. And the stuff that they're doing, they get in front of a police car, they start throwing stones and rocks at the police car, beating on it with sticks and whatever. And then if the police try to move the car, they're like, can you believe the brutality of those people trying to move the car where we're trying to beat them and pull them out of the vehicle? I was told in the Fairfax area, if you've ever been to LA, there's a shopping area called The Grove. We've been there. I heard that on Fairfax Avenue, every business was destroyed in Los Angeles, every single business. People were telling me in Portland, Oregon, Salem, Oregon, and other places, other towns in Oregon, riots are happening. I saw riots in Seattle. This is Chicago. Well, I'm not sure how you can tell the riots actually happening in some parts of Chicago, because the usual weekend is 14 or 15 shot dead. And I will tell you, I'm not that nervous of a guy. We used to go to New York City back when New York City was not that great, and I take the subway everywhere. And remember, we were staying with that one lady, PM, and she said, where's your husband? Oh, he went down to see Times Square at night. He goes, well, how do you get there? Took the subway. Is he out of his mind? There's a person who takes the subway to work every day. She goes, he's got to be out of his mind. And one time I did have a guy coming up out of one of the subways around Times Square, kind of lunged at me, and that was back in the days when I could do 2 or 3 steps at a time, going up. And but everything is just out of control. You see these videos. This is this morning's Columbus Dispatch. And it seems like this stuff is planned. Here's a picture on the left, a little video on the left of Minneapolis. That's Minneapolis. It looks like it might be Baghdad, right? No, this is America now. And I don't know when we always say, is it going back to normal? I don't know if it is going back to normal. Now, here's a picture of some protesters lined up to get ready to protest, and I forget the city, and I forget the source of this, but I did source it out. Do you see what's in the back behind the protesters? A chartered bus. I also saw a number of videos, and this shows this, you can't figure out what's going on. You can't prove what's happening. And I like the truth. I like to know what's going on. But in one city, there was a guy there with a backpack and an Antifa mask. Have you seen this? And he's directing people, go down here to this next intersection. There's a pallet of bricks there for you to use to throw through the windows. And they have them, those carts you get at Home Depot and Lowe's? They have carts going up and down the streets in American cities full of bricks and people standing there with cameras directing people to take the brick and throw it through windows. There's video after video after video of this on Twitter and YouTube. Now, some people say, well, it must be Soros or Antifa thugs that are doing this. Other people say, no, that's the deep state elite that are trying to make all the other people look bad. And so the problem is everybody's got a theory about this, and nobody knows what theory is right. But what's happening is that pretty serious conflict situations are being set up. The people on the right are mad, the people on the left are mad, and it's not even summer yet. And so I will confess to you, I'm concerned. So I don't know that I'll be going downtown that much. I don't even know if our office building down there will be open. Like I said, the lower levels there at the Huntington Center, the windows were broken out. Somebody on the edge of downtown, an attorney that I know, he got a call from the police, said, listen, we expect trouble. You got about an hour to put plywood up over all your windows and doors and get out of there. And we can't. He goes, well, you're going to protect it? What if they set it on fire? And he goes, we'll do what we can do, but you need to put plywood up everywhere. So I had to go out and get better make sure it's 3/4-inch plywood. They had all the instructions there. And so this is Columbus, Ohio. And that's not right in the Broad and High section. It's within the freeway loop downtown, but sort of on the edge of it. Attorney General Barr gave just a short statement yesterday. Here's what he had to say sort of about what's going on and what needs to be done, in his view.
Good afternoon. The greatness of our nation comes from our commitment to the rule of law. The outrage of our national community about what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis is real and legitimate. Accountability for his death must be addressed and is being addressed through the regular process of our criminal justice system, both at the state and at the federal level. That system is working and moving at exceptional speed. Already, initial charges have been filed by the state. That process continues to move forward, and justice will be served. Unfortunately, with the rioting that is occurring in many of our cities around the country, The voices of peaceful protest are being hijacked by violent radical elements. Groups of outside radicals and agitators are exploiting the situation to pursue their own separate and violent agenda. In many places, it appears the violence is planned, organized, and driven by anarchic and left extremist groups, far left extremist groups, using Antifa-like tactics, many of whom travel from outside the state to promote the violence. We must have law and order on our streets and in our communities, and it is the responsibility of the local and state leadership in the first instance to halt this violence. The Department of Justice, including the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, the ATF, the DEA, and our 93 United States U.S. Attorney's offices around the country are supporting these local efforts. We'll continue to support them and take all action necessary to enforce federal law. In that regard, it is a federal crime to cross state lines or to use interstate facilities to incite or participate in violent rioting, and we will enforce those laws.
Well, that's good. Here's another report I neglected to put in the right place. This is from the Times of London yesterday or today. Crisis accelerates march towards a cashless society. And then they cite the fact that a survey by Amaze, an online banking company for small businesses, revealed that 54% of small businesses were now cashless or were planning to be. 21% of those said that they had no plans to return to cash payments. So down here, debit card payments overtook cash for the first time in 2017, and the trend is now accelerating even further. And the thing is, go back to the end of January, middle of January, and compare it to where we are 4 months later. I think it's pretty safe to say that the world has changed dramatically in 4 months. Now, as we've talked about Bible prophecy, I have talked about for many years, there's going to be an acceleration of these things as we get closer to the end. It's going to be very turbulent. It's going to be like standing in the vortex of a tornado. So just a couple things and then we'll quit because it's time for lunch. This is the Tehran Times from the other day. Now, couple things. When Israel celebrates their independence, the next day the Palestinians and Arabs have a thing called Nakba Day, the day of catastrophe. And it's interesting, when they have Jerusalem Day, the Muslims and Arabs have Quds Day. We're going to take back Jerusalem. And here's a headline. I mean, it's pretty clear what they're thinking. This is an Iranian publication, COVID 1948. What happened in 1948? Israel became a nation. And so what's the implication there? Israel is a virus. And I showed you some of the things last week, how will the abolition, this is from Khomeini's webpage, how will the abolition of Israel be accomplished? And it's kind of interesting. If you look at the map up there, you see it sort of looks like, Ezekiel 38 and 39. So like, wow, I had to grab that from, Prophecy Update when I talk about Ezekiel 38 and 39. Thanks, Ayatollah, for, doing some of the graphics for me. And this is pretty good graphic showing how they, Palestine will be free. I think I used this last week, the final solution, resistance until referendum. And there was a speech on Quds Day by Ayatollah Khomeini. I'll just read you an introductory paragraph. In a May 22nd, 2020 speech on Quds Day, the plundering of the state of Palestine and the formation of the Zionist cancerous tumor, Khomeini said, is the greatest crime in recent history. He said that the heretical doctrine of Zionism had been invented by England and by the Jewish masters of gold. He emphasized that the fighting for the liberation of Palestine is jihad for the sake of Allah and an Islamic obligation. Ayatollah Khomeini also said that the Zionist regime will be removed like the dangerous, malignant growth that it is, and criticize people who say Israel is a reality. He also compared the veteran Zionist virus to COVID-19, and he urged people to support and arm Palestinian resistance fighters and help expand the jihad in Palestine. He added, victory is guaranteed. And you can go to memory.org and they have a pretty good transcript of the important parts of that speech. Middle East Media Research Institute, MEMRI.org. And then here's from the Jerusalem Post the other day. Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah in Lebanon, on the anniversary of the 20th anniversary of the end of the Israeli-Lebanon war, he said, there will be a great war on all fronts. Nasrallah warned Israel of the great war that will open on all fronts at once, saying it would be the end of Israel. So where do you think they want this to end up? I mean, it's pretty clear. So this is where it's set up in Israel. They finally have a government, and Netanyahu's been on trial. And so, look, everywhere you look, you hear wars, rumors of wars. I have hours and hours and hours and hours of stuff that I could talk about that I think is relevant to these sort of outline of the end times that Jesus and the prophets gave us. So it's clear to me that we live at this time. But as I said last week, the examples I quoted extensively from Joel, the book of Joel. I've also quoted extensively from Daniel, particularly Daniel chapter 9. And in both of those cases, what the prophet Daniel and the prophet Joel said, that when the people of God saw the approaching time of the day of the Lord, when these judgments were going to unfold, the reaction was they got down and they repented and prayed. In Joel, it says, call a solemn assembly and fast and pray. So I think those are good admonitions for the church today. I do think it's going to be, my fear is that in 4 or 5 months, you may be looking back and thinking about the nice calm days of the end of May of 2020. That's a distinct possibility. And I wouldn't describe these days as calm, but everything is relative. So look, get right with the Lord, share the gospel, and let's pray. Father, thank you so much. We pray that you will give us opportunities to share the gospel with those around us. Pray that you will have us be people who are committed to truth and not and driven by truth and love of the gospel and commitment to Jesus Christ, and not driven by fear. Give us strength, courage, protect us, watch over us, give us wisdom as we move about in a rather chaotic world. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.